Hello, everybody. I'm Alan. I hold shift out of Frio.
And I'm Austin Visions Neal.
This is the Defuse, presented by CMG, of course, the New York's Subliners Home Series, taking place and concluding today in what I don't even know what time is it.
Yeah.
Hello? It's already over. I don't even understand. Where am I?
I don't know, Alan. It just felt like this is probably the fastest day of Call of Duty I think we've ever gotten. I'm just trying
Ever.
to I'm trying to think back to like an
history of
event
Call
that
of
went
Duty.
that quick. But I mean, maybe on lands, even then they go super long. There's delays, but yeah, today just flew by. It was pretty wild, man. It was pretty wild.
Wild scenes. But of course, this is the Defuse, your CDL post-game talk show. We run this every single day after the games have completed. So let's get this fuse lit. Let's get things started and talk about those games that we're framing up. It's not a lot to talk about. Atlanta versus Chicago. Well, we waited for this game for how long, Vision? Since day one, pretty much. If not day one, definitely day two. And, it was long awaited, but it was short-lived as Chicago absolutely had their way with the Atlanta FaZe squad.
Oh, they sure did, Alan. They sure did. And I think this was a little bit surprising. I mean, it was probably not the series that obviously everybody wanted because we waited for so long for them to clash. They finally did. And it's a hot 3-0. But I mean, I was a bit surprised because I think Abizi, coming into what seemed to be one of his best events, I think he's had all year for sure. He had a 1.39 KD coming in toward today. I was looking on him to be off the, the back end of maybe what phase we're going to be able to build off of. But I think that there's, a couple of problems, obviously, total going for phase. This whole entire week, they were scrimming, obviously, with a lot of different weapons because they weren't really sure exactly what the meta was looking like. And then Simp had went on Twitter to say we had to actually change up what we had a read on for the meta during this home series. So I think it maybe really threw them off. They didn't have a whole lot of practice and great understanding or grasp of how they wanted to play this new meta. And it obviously very much affected them because Huntsman just pretty much blew through them on every single map. In the search and destroy, was not even close. It seemed like they were just having their way with them. But map 3 was the only one that we got that was kind of back and forth, but still Huntsman, still controlling that for the most part.
And now we take a look at, get the brooms out for the sweep here. But for Atlanta in total, we look back, we'll go last weekend. We were talking about the fact that what's going on with Atlanta's domination. It was nowhere to be found after they had done so well with it. And now this weekend, what the heck is going on with their search and destroy Visions? I mean, they win one map on search, and it was a 6-3, but there were some very scary moments when they played up against the Paris Legion on the St. Petro, but they got beat up in search and destroy. Nothing went round 11. They had 2 games that went round 10, but I don't know. I'm just a bit lost on what's been going on with Atlanta FaZe search and destroy over the last couple of weeks now.
Yeah, man, it's kind of sad because we saw them in such a great groove, I think, early on. But when you think of like when FaZe has been clutching up their famous round 11 game 5s, I've seen enough of them as a Toronto fan, but it's really been too many of them to count, and it's been off the back end of usually Celium, who goes absolutely massive, like just puts up crazy numbers that you should never ever even see out of most players here at this level against another team. And usually that's been off the back end of the searches, right? And then usually it's also been off the back end of also a BZ opening up with First Bloods. Simp also trying to do that as well from time to time with the sniper when he's rocking it on things like the longer maps. So the fact that things have went downhill for them, I'm still not completely sold that this Atlanta FaZe is, not going to be able to regain and get themselves back to where they were. But it's obviously on a downward trend for as far as what they've been able to do as of late. And I think that with replays, they're going to get themselves back on par once they get a read on this. But they have a lot of game modes to tighten up because they don't look strong in anything particular, except for maybe the domination you could argue here for this weekend, where they obviously weren't able to close that one out against Huntsman.
And it's one of those things that for Atlanta, I'm glad that you had brought up the point that there was a lot of conversation about how they had been playing with the AUG a lot up until the last couple of hours before the tournament started. There was kind of, maybe it was a bit of bait, but they were talking about how they were going to play with the AUG this weekend. They've been practicing with it. And I think we saw that with Abizi playing as strong as he did, which again, you mentioned, I think in the top overall KD on the weekend, even with the loss today in 3-0 fashion, but Sid picking up that third M4 is looking very, very good for them. The big question mark that kind of lies is not necessarily in their respawn, because again, they do hold positive differentials. They went 3-1 in Dom. They went 4-2 in Hardpoint. It lies in the search and destroy. And do you need to change up maybe your mentality in search? Because this is a squad that's used to running at people when it comes down to early set strategies, especially on their attack. Abizi really kind of emphasizing that heavy, even in this weekend where they didn't look necessarily as good as they normally do in the search and destroy. But now that you've got Sip mostly running an AR, is he going to be able to get the follow-up help that he needs? Is that kind of set strategy behind it going to be there? But I will say this, on the other side, I don't really know how much of an argument I can make for that because Chicago came out, didn't really seem to make a difference what weapons they were running. They had so much creativity built into their search and destroy, especially on attack. They looked phenomenal in the search, especially in what was a 6-1 on the St. Petro here versus the FaZe.
Yeah, you just see them, working together, finding maybe a couple of good calls. I think I don't know who is necessarily maybe stepping up and making some of their shot calls. I think usually, from what we've heard from most professional teams, it's usually everyone that makes an input, or if someone wants to make a call, then they make it, and that's what they go off of. That's how FaZe kind of likes to play their search and destroy. And it almost just seems like everything they were doing was just working. But I think the most impressive one, Alan, was when we saw them in a disadvantage. I think it was a 2v4, 2v3. They were inside of the A site. They found themselves a kill. They went to rotate out, found another kill, rotated then back in to catch both players flanking A to trying to get it. And it was like, damn, some of these calls were like, that's a ballsy call, but to be able to make it is just absolutely exceptional. And yeah, they've been fantastic, man. It's got to feel so good for Huntsman, despite how the grand finals go for us, that they've been still looking so good in search and destroy, because that is going to win you tournaments. It's something that's been said for such a very, very, very long time. And it just seems like it maybe just came down to just a couple of blunders, too many mistakes in their series losses that happened. But in this one in particular, they obviously just had FaZe's number, and it just almost felt like they couldn't even fight back in a lot of situations, but they were so far behind that you're just like, damn, this one's just looking like it's over. And that's not what you would ever say about FaZe in the first half of the year.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. But again, 3-0 here in surprising fashion. I think for most people, a disappointing outcome because we wanted to see more of this matchup in closer fashion. But that would not be the only 3-0 of the day. New York versus Toronto would be the next one up. And I think both, I will give us a little bit of a pat on the back. I thought we broke down this potential matchup last night very well, talking about how the fact that, Toronto is stronger on some of the maps that New York is also strong on. And the first opening 3 maps, if you look at just the statistics, win-loss wise, all 3 maps were not bad maps for either team. That said, though, the Respawns New York able to find great ways to clutch up, both on the Gunrunner for what was their first hardpoint, and then again on the Hackney Yard domination. But it was this really the accuracy Zuma and Attach show early in this one. Is accuracy. You had like 41 and 26 on Gunrunner. Zuma had a couple of nice double and 3K rounds on the Arklov Peak. And then the Hackney Yard domination, there were a couple, again, clutch moments where you really saw those 3 kind of coming to life. Of course, you got good supporting help all the way through that for, obviously, Mac and Tep, 2 players that we said. Really, I guess we said that accuracy and Tep had to have big days. And we'll talk about it in the final because they both had big days today. But when you've got that much production from your main AR on your respawn and accuracy, I feel like this New York team is going to be it's going to be hard pressed to find losses on respawn when accuracy's playing at a 41 and 26 total on Gunrunner hardpoint of all maps.
Gunrunner 4,700 damage,
Nuts.
it's disgusting, dude. I think the crazy thing about that is, if you would have said like a couple months ago, hey, name your top 6 ARs in towards the game, just come up with 6. I don't think very many people would have thrown accuracy.
I don't think so either.
That, right? I probably would not have. I'm going to be completely honest. And I think that this meta really fits accuracy, because think back to when accuracy was at his best, at his peak. I personally think back to World War II when he had the FG, when he was able to have the STG. He was just sitting and just absolutely mowing people down. He could play a lot more of a passive play style. And obviously with the back end of Black Ops 4 heading in towards Modern Warfare with the first meta that we've had up towards this point, that is not how it's played whatsoever. But now things are a tad bit more stagnant, and that's why I think people like accuracy, people like Slasher, even Octane are going to find even more success than they've already gotten, because you're able to play that a little bit slower. You can let your aggressive ARs push up for you like they would normally do with their submachine guns and with the MP5. So this is just an absolute heyday, I think, for accuracy. I think it only goes up for him as long as we stay within this particular meta, I think, for the most part. But yeah, New York, I think of that first game 1 was the biggest one for us, because we saw a very crazy coordinated hit, right? Like they had 1 hit to do it. You have 1 hit to be able to break it, and that is a lot of pressure to break yourself into, of all hills, P2, fighting from the P3 Cole side of the map. And it all came down to a perfect play from Attach, who hits the middle, wins his gunfight up against Bance. Accuracy peaks the top, but does not over peak to make sure he's not going to be spotted by more than 1 Ultra member, and just absolutely plays it perfect. They pinch at the same time. They find a break, Allen, and that's what I think maybe shattered Toronto Ultra, I think, really early on in that series.
It was good scenes, man. I actually am running my my Andbox official merchandise. I didn't realize how much green was in this hoodie. You could see right through me right here. You could see the CMD back from behind it. But I'm not gonna lie, this is a poor choice. It's very hot right now. But That said, it is fair to rep, and I know that you love to rep. So let's talk Toronto and their potential ceiling. Again, this was a great follow up weekend after what was a solid outing with Kleenex the first time around. So the question kind of stands here for Toronto in whole. What is their ceiling? Are they going to kind of face the same kind of hiccup that New York had when they were instantly putting in Mac? The fact that they were having a tough time getting past the top four squads. Is it looking like that very well could be the case here for Toronto? Or do you think that with Classic instead of medals, this 5-man roster, that this team could potentially be a top four squad?
I think they can be a top four squad, but I think that it's a really hard argument that has to be made because, like you said, they have not found a whole lot of success here against, some of the top teams. Yes, they
Well,
beat
yeah,
FaZe
I
in
mean,
3-2 fashion, right? Which
exactly,
did
exactly.
look really good. But I think the most part is that FaZe has also looked not so good as of late. So then there's people who are like, well, FaZe hasn't looked good. They're not a top team. They're no longer the top team in the world, like we have been saying
I
here.
mean,
And it's hard to say. So I do think that Toronto is going to make themselves in towards a point where they will be, I think, a top four squad by the end of the year. But it's really going to come down to, I think, trying to practice out some of these, again, these mistakes that are happening in respawns in particular and just closing out maps because their respawns are very, very close. It's not very rare that we see them take complete control, I think, of hard points and dominations. They always seem to almost come down to the wire. They have to rely on a clutch play, very similar to how players Legion relies on Kismet to usually do that a lot for themselves, like we saw on Friday and Saturday. So it's really hard to make the argument for them, but I mean, as not just trying to not be biased in the situation, I do think that they will be able to do so, but we just need to see them really dig deep here for practice over these next couple weeks.
and the good news here, I think, overall for Toronto was the fact that you looked pretty solid at different moments in every single game mode.
That's
The
fair.
bad news is there were also some moments where they didn't look necessarily so great in each of the individual game modes, with the exception of Hardpoint. They didn't really have any blowout losses on Hardpoint whatsoever this weekend, which is good news for them. A team that, again, was looking really strong in their Hardpoint the week before. Now all of a sudden you come back and you have another solid weekend in Hardpoint. You're feeling really good about your respawn, I think, with maybe the exception of what you were able to do on Hackney Yard or probably not Hackney Yard on St. Petro, or what you weren't able to do versus the line of phase on St. Petro or yesterday and the winners portion of that group that they had. But I feel strong about this Toronto team. I really do. I feel
Yeah.
like these guys could really do a lot of work. The problem here is we will talk about it as we get later is can they find a way to close this season out in a very difficult homestand that they have, by the way? That's the final home series of the season in which all of the top teams will be there. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to pose the question of will this team be able to get over the hurdle of some of those top squads? And I think, again, like you mentioned, yeah, Atlanta FaZe looked a little softened up as far as what we came to expect. You're able to get a best of 5 win there, but we also saw them play Atlanta FaZe on the old meta, and they were able to take them to the best, another best of 5. With that time
Yeah,
they lost. So
that's true.
there's a lot I think that could potentially still be yet to see here for the Toronto Ultra. Very excited about their potential progress as we kind of finish off the weekend, or not the weekend, pardon me, the regular season for them. So getting to our grand finals again, it's 8:15 in the evening, and we're done. So
Wild.
it's nuts, man. 3-0 here though for the Chicago Huntsmen, or pardon me, for the New York Subliners against the Chicago Huntsmen. And this was, I would say, almost more surprising than seeing them 3-0, the 3-0 versus Chicago versus Atlanta. I expected this game to be pretty nitty gritty. I was excited to see Double Ramaza off the start, but again, we saw that New York's clutch factor, especially when temp and accuracy are playing at a high level. This team absolutely could win a championship.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it yesterday. We're like, well, when this New York team's hot and cold, it's really hard to make predictions
It
and
really
arguments
is.
that they're going to be able to do something like this. So I think probably like 95% of the community had said, well, Huntsman's going to be able to take this. Maybe they get a game off them. But no, they take more than a game off them. They take the entire series. So I think that it is a very surprise. Like it's just like completely wild. And I think, and when you really do look at the squad, I mean, they have the players that have been champions. I mean, Attach is a world champion, man. I think that's something that's forgotten about, quite a bit. Like he's been able to do it. He's really been one of those players that I think has really stood out in a lot of different moments, but maybe has not been talked about because they add Mac Melt. And I mean, speaking of Mac in particular, he's now almost gone under the radar because everybody else seems to be stepping it up. And that's best case scenario, right? Because when we saw New York on a little bit of an uprise, it was because they added in Mac for 0 and everything just seemed to be clicking because they needed that aggressive player to be able to get up into their faces and match some of this pressure that Azuma and Attach are doing. That is exactly what happens up against Chicago. And I'm not even totally sure what went wrong for Chicago. I think for the most part, I think like it just like based off the last series, Alan, you see them get a 3-0, and it's like, all right, they just beat FaZe. This is the series we waited for all year. They're going up against New York. I think they're the favorites, and just things just do not swing their way.
It was so funny because we were watching that Ramaza hardpoint, and the first rotation of Hills was like, all right, no, New York, you take 45 seconds. Plus,
Yeah.
we'll come back. We'll take our 45. You take the next 45. We'll take the following 45. It wasn't until the second rotation of Hills that we started to see some actual coordination for breaks. I mean, we were sitting there kind of aghast because that first electronics shop hardpoint, New York coming off 55 points from P1, they never made one concentrated hit towards the second hardpoint. They're just like, fine, you guys have it. We'll just take P3. And at that point, Chicago never really had a true setup for P3 break. It wasn't until those breaks came through that I think we started to see that New York wasn't going to be touched today. And we saw a handful of incredible kills from Zuma and Attach, but Temp also just doing such an incredible job, just mastering some of the middle ground. And that was when I started to see, okay, this New York team is not going to be put down silently. And well, they weren't going to be put down at all, apparently.
Nope.
It's one of those things, though, that it's going to read as a 6-4 in the Ramaza Search and Destroy, but New York really started to run away with that game up until Pristini and Arcitys had their way in kind of those middle rounds. And I still look at that Ramaza Search and Destroy in a world where we were talking about how if Chicago's search looks like this on all the other maps, there's no way they're losing this weekend. They put them down pretty heavily, and it was through their own creativity, which again I think is really inspiring, not just for New York to win this series, but to do it as convincingly as they were, especially with the Search and Destroy, which has been a little bit of a weak point for them in weeks past. All of a sudden, you get yourself 9 straight map wins, 3-1, 3-0, 3-0. That's insane.
Yeah, man. I think that they did some homework. Let's be honest. Dude. They played them on that Ramaza Search and Destroy before. They got smoked. And when you think of that, you think of Envoy just doing some crazy things. You think of Formal's 1v2 clutch, right? A lot of fumbled rounds, I think, is really what solidified that win for Huntsman. And I think looking at what they did today, it was like, all right, they got a lot more loose. Like you looked at Chicago in that last series when they were playing them and they were taking control compared to this time around. It was like, okay, Chicago's like, whoa, all right, let's slow things down a little bit. Let's try and work a pick. And Temp's like, I don't care if you guys want to work a pick. I'm running at you either way. And he did it round after round after round. And you could just see on Ramaza, when you get trapped into that situation on offense where you're not getting a whole lot of map control, you just get completely suffocated and choked. And it limits the amount of plays you can really make towards either bomb site because both bomb sites are not easy to take and you have to do it off the back end of baiting and switching. And when you're already down a man on so many of those occasions off the start of the round, like it's that much more difficult when you're having to bait and switch and hopefully come out with a 2-for-1. That's not something you can rely on round after round after round. So I think New York just did a good job of pressuring just little points of the map and just really just suffocating them and narrowing down what they were able to do in the rounds that they had.
Yeah, very exciting things, I think, overall. And I don't want to look at this, and I don't know how the conversation is going to follow. I do not want to look at this in any kind of a negative light for Chicago because they did play both the respawns extremely close. And a Search and Destroy Ramaza, which candidly is a very good map mode combination for New York and isn't necessarily the strongest for Chicago, even though they did 6-1 New York on this map earlier in the series. And again, that is a 3-map kind of all the way through. But the one question that I do have is how in the world did we get another Hackney or domination? That was my biggest question because New York's hard veto all year long has been St. Petra on Dom. They have yet to play it a single time. And if Chicago, it has to have been a Chicago didn't do their homework thing. Like, how do you not read that New York doesn't play St. Petra or Dom, but in their last 6 straight Doms, they've played nothing but Hackney Yard. I just a little bit perplexed on why you wouldn't try to put them on what is your best domination mode in Gunrunner. It feels like something went awry, whether Chicago banned out St. Petro before New York had a chance to veto and that New York said, fine, we'll just take away your Gunrunner and you'll play us on Hackney Yard. Or if it was Chicago saying, no, we don't want to play our Gunrunner, let's run it back on Hackney. I don't know what the conversation was, but either of those kind of lends to maybe a possible mistake in the map veto and pick process for the Chicago Huntsmen, because I was a little bit confused on why we would go back to a Hackney Yard domination where, again, New York has played their last 6 matches on domination on that map.
Yeah, I really wish I was a fly on the wall when they were doing that video.
For real.
Because it would have been nice to know, right? It's like, okay, what was their thought process behind what they wanted to do to maybe to alleviate some pressure on their map number 3, which, I think is something where they could find a lot more improvement out of the 3 game modes. So
Yeah.
I do think that it was just really, really interesting, and maybe they just like, listen, we want to face them on Hackney, and we just want to see if we can bring it to them. Maybe hoping that the first two maps probably went a lot better. Probably, I imagine they assumed that they had the leverage in the map number two, that of course did not go their way. And then when you go 0-2 down, heading into a map that New York's been playing in a very interesting way, like I think the entire weekend, because it's very similar to the Florida Mutineers, which you had pointed out. You know how like they find the perfect timings to be able to go for those C pushes and be able to get a neutralization, sometimes even the flag, back up, draw pressure, and then that's immediately how New York is able to move right in towards B themselves. And we even saw them play for some like 50-50s where they sent Attach in, everybody just camps in their spawn, they hope Attach wins the one-on-one. If he does, then they just make sure that they hold the spawns and then do the exact same thing, flood in towards B a little bit late. So it was just honestly too good of a map to give over towards New York based off of what we've seen them do on it the entire weekend.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. But big congratulations to the New York Subliners for
Absolutely.
being one of now two teams who have won their own home series. And I think there could be arguments that maybe London can do it at theirs next week. We'll talk about that in a minute. And maybe beyond that, if Toronto can find enough improvement, maybe they could do that as well at their own home series. I don't feel as good about that call, but maybe it could happen. Those are the two that are still left. But now that we kind of have our results, I want to talk a little bit about who goes where for a couple of different things here. The first being power rankings, first and foremost. With Atlanta FaZe getting smoked by Chicago, and Chicago being smoked by New York, and Dallas not being here, is I guess I would assume that we could agree that Florida's still probably the number one team. It's hard to say otherwise right now.
Sure.
But where is your conversation for New York, for FaZe, for Chicago in the mix of where they might relate to not just each other, but also Dallas, who we didn't see this previous weekend?
Yeah, I don't think Dallas goes anywhere for me personally.
I agree.
Because like we haven't really seen them, and I think this meta is also going to be really, really good for them next weekend. I'm going to put out a prediction there for sure, but we'll see. And yeah, I think that FaZe probably goes down because they've been on they've been weak, right? Like whether or not it's the meta change, whether or not they haven't had enough practice on the meta, you could throw in a lot of reasons on why FaZe isn't performing up towards what they were. The result is that they haven't been performing, and you simply cannot have them as a top tier team based off of what we've gotten to see out of them. So I think that they maybe come down to you could argue probably fifth, maybe probably fifth. I think for the most part, maybe
so
New York.
Hard to swallow. Oh my god.
I mean, maybe, right? It's hard to say, right? You're like, damn, FaZe is the best team like at the beginning of the year, and then now I'm like, all right, FaZe is down to fifth place. But I think that's probably where they go. Maybe New York goes up based off what they've seen, because I really do think that they're going to keep on performing like they are with this one, momentum coming off their home series, two, accuracy looking on form, and Attach Inzuma in championship form heading in towards champs for us at the end of August. So a lot of great things I think really coming into play for the most part, what we're going to get from the squad. And I think that's maybe where I kind of move people around. But until we see the other teams play, I think it's really hard to shift some of those other teams within the power rankings at the moment.
I'm right there with you. It's just, man, like I look at how this is going to line up, and it's just Atlanta FaZe in fifth, but like you can't necessarily put them above Chicago or New York still because, well, I mean, I don't know, man. It's so weird to kind of pin this one up because they did beat New York 3-2 last time they played them.
Sure.
But at the same point, Atlanta also lost to Toronto, and then obviously got a little bit beat up by Chicago overall. I would say that you've got Florida up top. I think you got Dallas number 2. I think from there, it's just kind of like, do you put New York definitively above Chicago? I think you kind of have to, but it just feels weird to say it because this is a team that also lost to Chicago this weekend. So like,
I know.
It's going to be a really weird weekend of power rankings. I will say though, I have seen enough from Toronto to move them up to the 6th spot overall, which I think was kind of the big question mark. You know, the top 5 are going to be the top 5. For me, like 6 to 8 are just like filled with teams that just like you just don't know. Like London, probably consistent enough to sit in that range. Minnesota, probably not consistent enough to sit in that range. But Toronto, I think, makes their break into that top 6 for me, at least personally, as I'm kind of thinking about it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, as the Toronto fan, I'm like, absolutely, I agree.
No one's surprised, Austin.
Maybe would take those. But yeah, no, I do think that again, the squad is really, really looking good. I think they need more practice. Remember, they made the roster swap, right, from medals to classics, so that's not a whole lot of practice they've necessarily had with a core 5 roster. So I think that's why it's really good news for them, and that's why I think it's also going to be good news for a couple of other teams that made some last second changes. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, I think I put them right below New York right after, and or rather right after phase, I think, for the most part. And I think that they will be able to continuously show us that heading in towards their homestand, where I hope they're able to match up against the top tier team, because that's really obviously going to be the toughest
Yeah.
part, is really having a stack in towards that. But yeah, it's very very hard to say who is going to be, right after that, because it's almost just like a moment of like who's hot, who's cold. It's like, well, they look good this event. The next event, it's like, whoa, issues here on this game mode, issues here. So yeah, it's very much harder, I think, past the top six to be able to get a real good solidified six from there on out.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about potential playoff matchups. I sent in your Discord DMs a look of what the bracket would look like right now. I don't know if you had a chance to see that or
I
not.
do see that.
But overall point standings: Atlanta FaZe now number 1, Chicago number 2, Florida number 3 by 10 points over the Dallas Empire. The big move, obviously, is the New York Subliners, who go from like 9th to 5th overall this weekend. Minnesota starting to take a bit of a dive. London at 7, Optic Gaming, Paris, Toronto, Seattle, LA. So taking a look at what this bracket would look like, just starting with some of the opening matchups right now, you still have Toronto currently in the 9th position, which means they would start in losers round 1. Not a place that you want to start. But if they win again or get a couple of clutch points that they are able to secure, they could move very easily in the number 8 spot, which would put them
Yeah.
in the winners bracket. And that's a tricky spot, because if you finish anywhere between, well, really, if you finish 7th or 6th, you're feeling pretty good. If you're finishing in 8th, though, it puts you in a bad spot, because you're probably be going up against either New York or Dallas, depending on how the end of the season goes for both of those teams. That's not a great draw for a team like Toronto, whereas the 6 and the 7 currently is Minnesota versus London.
And that's a pretty good feeling, I think, for both those
Oh,
teams, right?
like,
Like, it's
hey,
like,
they're Hail Mary full of grace. Like, goodness, that is a blessing.
oh yeah, they're feeling real happy. I think both of those teams in particular, because Minnesota obviously has not been looking great and has not solved or fixed their issues. And we've obviously talked a lot about that yesterday. Maybe they got an early read on the meta, and since then teams have caught up, and they haven't necessarily been able to show us anything on why they would be a team that could beat some of our top six that we currently have in the power rankings. But yeah, if you can get yourself into some kind of a crazy run, I think, in that homestand for Toronto, and maybe even get yourself in towards a finals appearance, which might be a stretch for the teams that we have in. But I mean, if you're going to get yourself, if you're going to make an argument for what Toronto's going to be able to do for COD champs, then you have to be able to show us what you can do at that homestand in particular, right? I mean, that's just, I think, what it comes
It's
down
so
to.
difficult, man.
If you can't take down the top teams in your homestand, how are you going to be able to do it at COD champs, where there's even more pressure, more money in the line, more eyes on the tournament, and everything along those lines? But yeah, getting in towards that 8th spot, not not going to look good if you're up against, like you said, someone like Dallas, someone like who we might even end up getting dropped down here a tad bit for us in towards the rankings. It's not going to be a good first one, but it's a lot better of being in the losers bracket to start with. I mean, there's nothing worse than showing up to COD champs, Alan, playing your first match in losers, ending up losing it maybe in a heartbreaking fashion. It's like, all right, well, you're done for the year, right?
Yeah,
So
good.
that's unfortunate for sure.
It's just one of those things too, looking at the points, and this is where we start to look at the London home series that's coming up in the future here. For Toronto, Paris, and Optic, they're all tied at 70 points apiece currently. Toronto, again, the bad news is you're going into a heavily stacked home series. For
Mhm.
Optic, you're in pretty good standings right now, because you
Yeah.
and London are in the same group at it. What is a very soft London home series coming up next weekend. Optic has to play Florida first, not the best news in the world, but London plays Seattle. So you figure that worst case scenario, Optic loses to Florida, Seattle beats London. Optic and London have to play each other. One of those teams is going to walk away with at least one win.
Yep.
So that
Absolutely.
automatically means that if you're a Toronto fan, you're rooting for London to knock out Optic, I think, at this point, if at
Agreed.
all possible, and then they only take those 10 points. It would be, I think, impossible for Toronto to sneak up into the 7th position. Their best bet would to sneak into 8th. But also at this home series that's coming up, you've got the Paris Legion, who are also here, and they're in a much more difficult pool, as they've got Dallas first, and then they would go up against what we anticipate would be the loser of LAG or New York, which is the other grouping, the other matchup in that group. So if you're a Toronto fan, there is a way that you can sneak into the 8th position, but you have
Yep.
to hope that both Paris and Optic both lose their games, and you still would have to find a way to win at least one matchup at your own home series, where, again, it's looking forward. They play up against Optic Gaming LA first, which you feel like should be a W. And then you've got Chicago and Seattle. So you're hoping that you can make a playoff. And I guess the even better news is if London doesn't do well and you find your way into a playoff and again, surprise an Atlanta, a Florida, or a Dallas, you very well could maybe end up in the top 7 position. That's good news if you're Toronto.
Yeah, it's a chance for sure, and it's really going to be how does this OGLA squad look after adding in 2 players from UYU, and I think that it could either go horribly wrong or it's going to go super good. But we looked at OGLA last time they made a big change; it looked really good for them. They made a run all the way in towards the semifinals, and it looked like all right, maybe this OGLA team is going to get themselves back on form and get them back to where they were. Based off what we've seen some of these players do last year. So
yeah,
that's I think going to be the biggest question mark for us. And I mean, I'm actually really excited to see this squad because as much as I am a Toronto fan and I want to see them get that winners bracket spot, I'm also like, I want to see what this OGLA squad can do here because, a couple of amateurs that we've been casting over, Alan, are getting their shot. Slashers, I think it's going to be also in a really good spot here with the meta, very similar to Accuracy with his showing here at this New York home series. So there is a lot of things I think playing in towards OGLA. It's really just whether or not they're going to be able to show up. Are they going to be able to handle tilt? Are they going to be able to regain and bounce back from a team like Florida, who's probably going to be able to deal with them? I would imagine pretty easily in a very first tough match, but lots to really look into. I mean, Seattle probably going to, I imagine, lose to London. We'll see London and Florida probably go up against each other, and then New York and Dallas go up against each other, I think would probably be the prediction that I would have. I think that would also be a really good look. It's like, okay, haven't seen Dallas in a while. We've seen New York. They look good. They probably come out on that series, but how do they match up against another top team that we have?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think as far as those predictions look like, I think this is a pretty softball pool of teams overall. I mean, you've got a definitive better team like Florida for sure getting out of their group without a question. It just comes down, can Optic get enough instant success off this meta swap to potentially surprise a team like London and make sure they get past a team like Seattle? But on the same front, like I don't see this meta hurting Seattle at all. I mean, when you've got Proto and Pander who they've been more forced, I think, to play SMGs, but now they're going to have some flexibility to go into an AR. I think that Seattle could be good here, but I don't know, man. Seattle's just in such a weird spot. I think overall it's going to be really tough, I think, to expect them to do much in that pool. But yeah, on the other side, I think you got Dallas, New York for sure. And the battle between Paris and Los Angeles, I think, will be an interesting one, but I don't think it'll mean much in the end of the day because I don't see either of those two teams beating a New York or a Dallas in their current form. So that's kind of taking a look as, again, what London will be happening, which is coming up this upcoming weekend. Not a lot of turnaround time for some of these squads. And then you've got Toronto immediately after that. So there's a lot still to come, but it's all coming very quickly, and it's going to come to a close very, very quickly. So as usual, we're taking viewer questions for you guys. So if you have not had a chance, if you go over to @CMG_esports currently on Twitter, we will be answering these questions here in just a moment. A handful of you guys have already submitted some really great ones. And beyond that, if you submit a question, we answer it, you will get 5 free credits on the CMG website. Pretty easy there for you. Without a doubt.
Pretty easy. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's no other way to put it, right? Like
I don't know how we can make it easier.
You put out a question, have an answer. We'll have an answer for you. And yeah, you get yourself 5 credits to be able to participate in the Warzone tournaments, Search and Destroy tournaments. Maybe you haven't wanted to gamble and see how you're going to be able to fare up against some players. Well, now's your chance to see how you're going to do. So yeah, absolutely. As easy as it comes.
As easy as it comes. So a handful of questions here. This is a good one from BMTH. Considering Scum's performance this weekend, as well as him not being able to perform at the level we expect these past few events, do you believe he should be subbed out for another player like Gunless? Or do you believe he's too important to the team to sub out?
I like that.
It's a spicy question. Mostly because we talked about the whole Gunless situation yesterday a bit.
We did.
My first impression is I don't think you could sub him out because you already have 3 solid not main ARs, but 3 solid M4 players right now. I mean, Pristini had definitely showcased that he can hang, and as much as we'd like to assume that this meta would favor someone like Gunless, you would be very much so lacking up front if you didn't have another SMG that could match up with Envoy. And yeah, maybe Scump isn't getting as involved as he was in the previous meta, but I still feel like he's too valuable to sub out at the moment.
He is pretty valuable, and I think, like, as much as there is a stat line that we're always looking towards at the end of each game, like
KDs,
there's a lot. Yeah, right. It's the KDs is thrown around the most, but he's also been the big entry player in particular this weekend for a lot of these hard points, along with Envoy, who I guess maybe performed pretty well, I think, but for the most part, different meta, big change. He's the one that's entering in, so usually he's going to be traded out anyway for a lot of these hard points because he's a sub player. That's just the meta that we are in now. But on top of that, Scum brings a lot towards the team, more than just simply just that, the guns and the kills and everything along those lines. He brings a lot of comms towards the teams. He's also a big vocal voice on that squad, and he has been across many Call of Duty teams all the way back towards Optic Gaming for the most part. So I don't think that you sub him out. If he has like an atrocious event coming up, his next one, then maybe you consider it. But I just think that Scumpy's a name that subbing out and Scumpy, those two just somehow just almost seem like they would never be in the same sentence. So I'm going to say no for me for sure.
I'm actually glad for this next question that comes through from Xerxes, because we haven't had a chance to talk about this, but there have been a couple moments that we've hinted towards it. Or pardon me, this is from City Creates. I apologize. We'll get to yours as well, Xerxes. It's a good question, but this one caught my eye first. Does Zuma deserve to be in the discussion for regular season MVP with how he performed this weekend, especially considering he was running the SMG role?
That is an interesting question.
I am gonna say not yet, because I think one of the reasons why we saw New York win this weekend was because Attach played as well as he's ever played throughout the entire of the weekend. But then, especially today, accuracy and temp played on a level that we don't normally see them on. Mac has been consistent. Attach has been consistent at a high level. Zuma has been consistent, maybe just a bit under that level. But he's going to be fulfilling a very important role right now. And I think New York needs him to play well to win. But I think New York also very badly needs players like accuracy and temp to have days like they did today if they want to have a championship in their future for this first season of the CDL.
Yeah, it's more on them for sure, I think, for this New York squad to have success. But yeah, it's kind of hard to throw the name right in because Zuma's name hasn't been thrown in towards the MVP mix the entire year, right? It's really just
and with you compare it to like what Abizi's done at the same role, Abizi's by far outshined him.
Agreed. I think there's been a lot of players. I mean, like when we saw Awakening win back to back, we're like, oh, maybe could he be thrown in towards the MVP mix? I mean, they add him in, and there's an argument for it because he's won 2 events, and he's also played very, very lights out. So if we see it again from Zuma, I think that there's a possibility for it 100%. But right now, I think that we just don't have enough data to go off of, and we haven't exactly seen that Zuma this tournament from this entire year.
Yeah, that's my biggest takeaway as well, is the fact that, this again, this was not exactly the most difficult weekend for them. Like they played Minnesota, they played New York, they played London. They did play Chicago twice and played them obviously much better the second time than the first time, and they obviously played Toronto very well, who is looking like a contender, but is not like an established top team at the moment. So if Zuma can continue to play at the high level and help New York find wins, I think his name will be thrown into the mix. But for this weekend, I think for New York, you did what you had to do. You needed to come out here, win your group, which, okay, technically they didn't do that, but get into the playoffs and then find a way to get to the grand finals. Better news if you can win the grand final in whole, and they were able to do that. This is a weekend that, again, they needed this to get out of the bottom 4 and into the potential top 4 conversation. I think it's going to be very difficult to rank this team on power rankings because it was not the most difficult weekend ever for them, but it was still an impressive finish to the weekend without a question, as far as how they kind of rounded out the day today. So I think as far as for Zuma to get into that conversation, I need to see New York do this kind of thing. It's going to be hard because the upcoming weekend they play at London is not the hardest weekend ever for them. He would have to have an absolutely magical performance versus Dallas, and New York would have to win a championship, I think, at London for us to really kind of consider them to be not just a top 2 team currently, but also is Zuma or anyone from this roster even in the running for potential MVP. I think that would have to happen. Kind of like the same thing we framed up for Florida, coming out and winning their first championship. Wow, damn, this team definitely a top 4 squad now. And then they win the second one. Okay, now we know for sure. And that's kind of the way that I feel like this season has gone for a lot of these teams. Now you're inserting New York kind of right behind the heels of Florida, and then just behind them, you've got Toronto that's looking to do the exact same thing. So I think that we need to see what happens at the end of the regular season before I think we can really throw anyone's hat in the rink from the side of the New York Subliners, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. And I mean, you could also probably even maybe argue that Attach could also be that one player too, right?
I would say Attach is over Zuma for me.
Yeah, I think as well. I was thinking, well, New York Subliners, I mean, if there were a different player other than Zuma, I think that it could very likely be Attach because Attach made a lot of clutch plays. And also he's been, I think, again, under the radar for as far as what we've gotten to see so far and towards this year. And he's been pretty good and really consistent. And to back him, some of the respawn wins, it's come down to him dropping those 30 bombs, going in as the entry man, being the big sub player here, and he's continuing to do that even in the new meta.
Indeed the case. So, Xerxes, this is your question. Do you think if the meta did not switch, New York still could have or would have come out on top this weekend? I'm going to start with just flat no. I don't
I
think they do.
agree. I agree. Accuracy again, like I hit on it earlier, right? Like accuracy is this is his meta. Like if it stays like this, I think this
Yes.
is where he's going to strive because you go back to World War II, he was looked the best when things were slow. When he was just a human turret, and could just mow people down, snap around, doesn't have to worry about this crazy movement and all this in towards the mix, right? That's when accuracy looked the best. He looked like that this weekend for me. So I agree that yeah, New York wouldn't have not won if it was for if they were playing in the old meta.
My first reaction is that Atlanta puts up more of a fight for Chicago, if not beats them, because they would not have had to be practicing with different weapons and things of that
Mhm.
nature. But I just don't know how many life rafts I can throw Atlanta at this point. Like, I feel
That's
like
fair.
I literally have thrown out so many lifesavers to these guys. Like, oh, well, their hard point looked bad this week. It'll be fine next week. Don't worry. It'll be all right. And then, oh, the search and destroy round 11s, game fives. Can they find a way to get through these series a little bit closer? They'll be fine. And now we're like, well, they just got a
Well,
new meta. They'll learn it. They'll be fine. But man, it just feels weird because we really are throwing a lot of life rafts over to Atlanta FaZe. Again, it's one of those things that because they played so well at the beginning of the year, and really through the middle of the year as well, that you're just sitting here saying that Atlanta, absolutely, they're a top team, and we might be at a very scary future here in the immediate couple of weeks where that might not be the case. Yeah, they're number one in the standings right now, but again, they go into a pool at the Toronto home series where they've got both Florida and Dallas, and on the other side, they've got teams like Chicago and Toronto waiting for them again. So I don't know, man. I still think that again, if the meta doesn't change, I don't think New York gets the W this weekend. I think they make the playoff, and they very well could make the grand final again.
sure.
But I don't see them winning the whole thing. I don't think that this team in that old meta would be able to still compete with a Chicago or an Atlanta, depending on how that matchup would turn up in the old meta.
Yeah, it's just too fast. I mean, as much as we've been throwing them a lot of life rafts too, because I want to kind of hit on the Atlanta face topic just for a quick second, because I do think that like they didn't get any practice and they were using the AUG like the entire weekend. And like from like someone
Yes.
who's played in like a meta switch and has experienced that before, it is very frustrating to like listen and practice and like listen, I think this is the read on the meta right now. This is really, really good. It's like, wait, it's all G8. I'm like, well, we've been just practicing up towards the tournament at this point. And it's like, everything's out the window. And I also think it's very frustrating too. It's very like, well, we're not playing up to our potential because we didn't get the good practice in. So it's very, very hard to maybe even not give them another life raft to be like, all right, well, they still have a chance. Let's show us here again very, very soon. We'll see if they can do it. If they can't do it, Alan, then no more life rafts. All right.
No
That's what
more.
we'll say.
No more.
No more.
Yeah, it's women and children first. Atlanta
That's
FaZe
right.
comes third. That's for sure. We're gonna say farewell though for this episode, right around where we want to have it, right at that 30-40 minute mark. So hope that you guys enjoyed the show. As always, congratulations to those that submitted those incredible questions. We always love having that come through and kind of getting your guys' take on what has occurred and what kind of things you might be speculating about. And hey, who knows? Maybe we'll have ourselves a midweek episode to kind of frame up the London home series a bit more in depth. Stay tuned at CMG_esports if you want to know more. But until the next episode, make sure that fuse doesn't fizzle out. So long.